Why, hello again. Fancy seeing you here. Not really, because you guys have to learn this. So, let's get going. So, in this video, we will talk about the Battle of Britain and the learning outcomes, basically to understand the phases of the Battle of Britain, kind of how the tactics changed at different points in this battle, and then understand the role of technology in the overall outcomes of the battle, the connection between technology and tactics and outcomes is one of the important aspects that you are required to know according to our syllabus. And then finally, to understand the role that it played in other battles of World War II. Hint, there will be a red question about this. All right, here we go. So first, we're going to start with an overview of the battle, and then we're going to start looking into some of the details. So, this Battle of Britain was fought between July 10th and October 31st, 1940, and basically this was an air campaign waged by the German Air Force to try to get Britain to surrender. One of the things you should be remembering at this point is that this is after the Battle of France, and France has fallen. And the next step is essentially to try to get Britain to undeclare war. So three phases in the overall battle. We have from July 10th to August 11th, so about a month. These were the Channel battles. Remember that Germany is essentially controlling the coastal, not essentially, completely controlling the coastal areas of France as well as the Netherlands and Belgium. And so these coastal areas were used as a stage launching for the airplanes. And this was fought in mostly the English Channel between both sides. And this was mostly experience granting. One of the things that, of course, is happening is that Britain has a very inexperienced air force. So they are trying to, as you know, during the interwar period, Britain had essentially really downsized its military, hadn't done very much investment in it. Now, Germany had made that investment with the Treaty of Rapallo with the USSR and, of course, the Spanish Civil War. However, these are different conditions than what the German pilots had flown in before. The English Channel is often rainy and cloudy and foggy. And so this was kind of the first month of this battle was both sides sort of learning how to fight this particular battle, this particular type of warfare that is aerial warfare. The next, for a couple of weeks in August, we have the German attack on the coastal airfields. And then from the end of August to September, German attack of the interior airfields. And I lied because, I can't count. From September, we start having the terror bombings on towns and cities. And that's pretty much it. In terms of the various phases. And then by October 31, the Battle of Britain is pretty much over. So this was the first air campaign. This was the first campaign fought entirely by air forces. So this is this is a really big deal in terms of the technology. In previous wars, states and civilian populations weren't in danger unless the infantry was essentially right at their doorstep. But now with this, you have dogfighting, not the illegal bad stuff, but fighting in airplanes, shooting from planes which hadn't been seen before. And of course, civilian populations are incredibly vulnerable. Battle of Britain is also Germany's first failure in World War II, and this is going to become very important later on. And in many ways, it's seen as a turning point in the war, a rallying. This doesn't mean that victory for Britain is inevitable, but it certainly is a huge morale booster. Because Germans are shown not to be invincible. So up until this point, Germany, basically, their blitzkrieg tactics were like really hardcore. They set out to defeat, and they did very fast before people could react. And this invincibility did play a part in why France basically gave up. But with this Battle of Britain, it is possible now. People have a hope. It is possible now that Germany can be defeated. Germany is now forced to fight a two-front war with Britain and the allies and the governments in exile of the occupied countries, of the German occupied countries, and with the USSR. There is a massive shift in American opinion. The U.S. and Britain have been historically very close politically and very close culturally, and so this now is seen. Germany is seen as being like overly aggressive. Like tyrant, and basically somebody has to put a stop to it, right? And so this basically means that even though the U.S. doesn't declare war at this point, there is a shift in political opinion in the U.S., and the American government is going to be more helpful. That is, giving Britain and her allies supplies on credit, and like letting them know where German ships are and things like this. So, beginning in the Battle of Britain, basically, as you see here, Europe at the height of Nazi German domination. So at the beginning of the Battle of Britain, France has fallen, and you have Vichy France and that collaborative government, and then you have Western and coastal France, that is the occupied areas, the Netherlands and Belgium, Norway, Denmark, done. Essentially, the vast majority of Europe was either allied with Germany or occupied by Germany. And keep in mind that the Soviet Union also had that German non-aggression pact. So essentially, the United Kingdom was alone, with the exception of the governments of exile, the governments in exile of the fallen European countries. Now, here is some background. All right. So on May 10th, Chamberlain's government was defeated as Winston Churchill became prime minister. Essentially, Chamberlain essentially had basically promised that he had delivered peace to Britain and to Europe with the Munich Agreement. And now, of course, fast forward a few years later, Chamberlain is actually it's Chamberlain's government that declares war on Germany. But people are pretty much done with Chamberlain, and Churchill comes to power. And the military essentially tells Churchill, dude, stay out of it, right? But Churchill sends help to France to support against the German invasion. As you know, from looking at the Battle of France, things didn't work out so well, and they had to basically, we talked about the evacuation at Dunkirk and stuff like that. And so during this time, during the Battle of France, the Royal Air Force, that is the British Royal Air Force, had lost a lot of planes and the trained personnel. And so the Air Force was not in good shape going into the Battle of Britain because they didn't have enough trained people. The gear up for war, the mobilization of Britain, happened pretty darn late. And so they were behind Germany in developing a functional air force. With the fall of France, Hitler is pretty confident that Britain realizes that she's in an untenable position, and basically she needs to back out of it. But that's just not how Britain rolls, yo. All right. So there were some people in the British government were for signing an armistice with Germany, Essentially because Germany had been invincible at this point. They saw France, they saw that they were essentially alone, and so some people were up for signing an armistice and letting bygones be bygones. Churchill, on the other hand, kind of belligerent, was all like, oh, hell no, but in a British accent. And his cabinet refused to sign this armistice, and so he goes to try to drum up public support to resist. And so he is speaking, and of course we know there's radio and all of this stuff now. So like these politicians have an almost unprecedented access to the population. And as he said in June 1940, he said, "The Battle of France is over. I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin." Essentially, he names this battle. Which brings us to, why did Germany choose airstrikes? Now, I know y'all are like really good students and stuff. And I know you know a lot of things about Germany and World War II at this point. And so I know you want to pause this and try to answer this question and see if your answers match up to mine. Yeah, I know. That was a dream. So I'll move on. Germany chose these airstrikes for a number of reasons. One, Germany controlled or was allied with most of the continent and Scandinavia. Essentially, that meant that she had this really large area under her control that she could then use to launch strikes. And she really wanted to turn her attention toward invading the Soviet Union. Actually, Hitler really wanted to turn his attention toward invading the Soviet Union. And so these airstrikes were seen as being like fast, dirty way to just like bomb the heck out of Britain and move on. With the control of Scandinavia and essentially all of the Atlantic coast of Europe, that meant that every area of Britain was vulnerable to air attack. And so this essentially, these airstrikes in the Battle of Britain was a continuation of the Blitzkrieg tactics. It's Blitzkrieg air. All right. And so they also thought that the bombing would be heavy and fierce, and Britain knew that she was isolated, and this would mean negotiation would be very fast. He didn't want to invade the Soviet Union and get into that whole two-front war thing. And he also wanted to get there at a good time and not make the mistakes that Napoleon made and Germany made during World War I. So get Britain out of the way, so turn his attention towards the USSR. Did not have equipment or training for an amphibious attack. Amphibious would mean a combination of land and sea attack. And so they hadn't developed that ability yet. They didn't have necessarily people trained to do this, whereas the Air Force was well trained. Essentially, they didn't have a Marine detachment of their military. And so essentially air was the only way they could go. Either they launch a complete land attack, which is essentially impossible, or they soften Britain up with air. And it wasn't so much that they wanted to conquer Britain, but wanted Britain to be out of the game. And this is why we talked about like the phony war and the fall of like the Scandinavian countries. One of the things, of course, we said that Germany lost a significant number of ships in order to gain the control of Norway. And so, yes, they got control of Norway and their iron and such, but that meant that they didn't have enough naval support to be able to launch a naval, like a full naval attack. And Hitler was advised by his military that the invasion of Britain was a bad idea. I should put some more goat music on for you. But in 1938, if you remember, because of the sex scandals in the military, Hitler was able to become supreme commander of the military, despite the advisement of people who are actually qualified military people. He did his own thing. All right, and even then, the military people told Hitler, even then, the margin for success was very limited, that they could only defeat Britain. First it was like, dude, don't go there. And then it was like, if you're gonna go there, everything needs to be perfect. Germany needs to have complete control of the air in order for this operation to be successful. So Grand Admiral Raeder said, a powerful and effective air force might create conditions favorable for an invasion. Whether it could was not in the Navy War Staff's province. So there's a lot of hemming and hawing there, telling him don't go there, but who knows? Success also hinged on complete control of the English Channel. So Germany needed to have complete control of the air, and she also needed to have complete control of the English Channel. And so Hitler ordered preparation for a British invasion on July 16th. Did he take it into consideration? Who knows, right? And this was a hope to frighten Britain into negotiations. And there we go. So directive number 16 on the preparation of a landing operation against England read in part as follows. Since England, despite its military hopeless situation, still has not shown any signs of being prepared to negotiate, I have decided to prepare a landing operation against England and, if necessary, carry it out. The objective of this operation is to eliminate the English home country as a base for the continuation of the war against Germany. So this explains to us Hitler's goal in this invasion, in the Battle of Britain. We know what tactics would need to, like the strategy that needed to be employed in order to make this successful. And included in these preparations is the bringing about of those preconditions which makes landing in England possible. The English Air Force must have been beaten down to such an extent morally, and in fact, that it can no longer muster any power of attack worth mentioning against the German crossing. So, this is, with this directive, this is what Hitler is intending the operation to follow. Was he really looking for complete capitulation in order to invade Britain? Or did he expect it to go as far as he did? You may want to analyze that and think about that. So Hitler attempted to maintain secrecy of his plans, but coded messages by Goering to the German Air Force commanders were intercepted by the British and decoded. So essentially, the British had a heads up as to what the Germans were going to be able to do and what they were planning on doing, which helped them in terms of their in response.